This may just be the fact that I'm single talking, but it feels like our culture is obsessed with love and with romance. You turn on the radio, you're almost certainly going to hear a love song. You watch any TV show or any movie, and there's almost certainly going to be a romantic plot line. There's even dozens of these apps and websites designed to help people find love. Not that I would know anything about those, of course. So you would think, with as much as we as a culture idolize love and idolize romance, that marriage would be held in high regard. After all, marriage is the sacred union between one man and one woman for life. It's when two people choose to love each other, no matter who or what gets in the way. You would think that marriage would be well esteemed in a culture that talks about love so much. But the truth is, as you well know, marriage is under attack. The biblical view of marriage is not held by many people in the world. And there are some who even go out of their way to slander God's prescription of marriage. Marriage is under attack from all fronts. Many married partners choose to commit adultery and have an affair against their spouse. Just under half of all marriages end in divorce, and the odds of getting divorced dramatically increase if you marry again. Not only is marriage being attacked by things like adultery and divorce, but many people today are practicing things such as premarital sex or polyamory, which is being in a relationship with more than one person. And there's also the secret killer of pornography lurking in the background, which perhaps destroys more marriages than anything else. You don't need me to tell you that what's going on in the world around marriage is not right. That how marriage is being viewed and treated today is not correct. Because all of those things I just talked about, the divorce and the adultery and the pornography, are in direct conflict with what marriage looks like according to God. Marriage, as God defines it, is under attack. And even those who are abiding by God's laws for marriage can and will experience hardships in the relationship that they have with their spouse. And if there's any book of the Bible that can help us remember what marriage should look like, it's the book of Song of Solomon. Now, odds are you've probably not heard a whole lot of lessons on Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs, as you sometimes hear it called. And the reason for that is pretty self-explanatory. The Song of Solomon makes us uncomfortable. The book is sexual in nature, and many of us have been conditioned to squirm in our seats anytime the word sex is mentioned, especially from the pulpit. In addition to the sexual content of the book, it's also chock full of references to things that we don't easily understand. The speakers in Song of Solomon are constantly comparing each other to things of their world, of their lifetime. And these references would have been easily grasped by people who originally or first read the Song of Songs. But they don't make sense to us today. They're not references that we understand. And not only do these comparisons confuse us, but a lot of them just seem plain wrong when we view them from a 21st century perspective. You add into this the fact that God is barely mentioned at all in the Song of Solomon, and you're left with perhaps the most unique and peculiar book in all the Bible. And this has left a lot of people wondering why God decided that the Song of Songs needed to be included in the Bible at all. At first glance, it doesn't feel like it fits in with the rest of the biblical narrative. But if we remember that marriage and sex within marriage are gifts that God has given to mankind, specifically, again, to man and wife, it makes sense that God would include a book in His Word dedicated to showing us the beautiful and the bountiful blessings that one can receive and one can experience when someone participates and engages in marriage according to God's way. Perhaps the Song of Solomon was included in the Scriptures to show us that God is not embarrassed by marriage or by sexual intimacy within marriage. And I think when we read the Song of Solomon today, we see the beauty of a godly marriage, which includes sex. And this interpretation of the Song of Songs is a bit new. It's a little bit more of a modern interpretation. Many well-meaning people in times past have understood this book to be purely an allegory or an illustration. Jewish readers took it as a representation of God and Israel. And some Christians have made the case that it's about Christ and the church. And I think we can understand why these arguments are being made, why these interpretations exist. Just like many of us, those who were trying to interpret Song of Solomon, they were uncomfortable because of the sexual nature and content of this book. And so they chose, instead of praising God for the blessings of marriage and intimacy, they looked at this book purely as a metaphor. It could only be a metaphor. And certainly there are some parallels between the relationship between marriage and also the relationship between God and Israel and Christ and the church. Both of those relationships, God and Israel and Christ and the church, are compared to Scripture, compared to marriage in Scripture. But I think we would be greatly mistaken if we only considered Song of Solomon to be an allegory, to be an illustration. Again, when we read the Song of Songs, when we examine the content of this book, it has a sexual component to it. And neither relationship between God and Israel nor Christ and the church is sexual in any way. Again, in my opinion, those interpretations that Song of Solomon is only about God and Israel or Christ and the church, they're rooted in the fact that they were uncomfortable about the sexual nature of this book. They saw sex as taboo and something not ever to be talked about in public. So there was no way that God could have included a book about sex in his word. In their minds, it had to mean something else. But the truth is, there's nothing shameful or wrong about sex as long as it is within the proper context of marriage. Sex is a beautiful gift from God to married couples to help them grow closer together, both physically and emotionally. It's not a dirty secret. It's a blessing. And so if you read through the poetic book of Song of Solomon, you're going to find that it primarily consists of a series of conversations between a young man and a young woman who are in love. Occasionally, some other people will join in and make a comment, but primarily, it's these conversations between this young man and this young woman leading up to and after their wedding. Because it's called the Song of Solomon, and as we see in verse 1 of the book, Solomon is credited as the author. Solomon is typically believed to be the groom, the young man in love in this book. And of course, that brings up another question. How is it that Solomon wrote this book, this beautiful book about love and faithfulness in your marriage between one man and one woman? Solomon had hundreds of wives and concubines. So how is it that Solomon, of all people, wrote a book about a godly marriage? Well, there's a lot of different opinions on that, and I'm not sure if anyone really knows exactly why Solomon wrote this book or what inspired him to write this book. Some have suggested that Solomon may have witnessed a loving marriage, and that inspired him to write this collection of songs, and he sort of interjected himself into the story. Others believe that it was simply written in the same style as some of Solomon's other poems and songs. But there's one point or one argument that I heard that really caught my interest. And again, I don't know if this is right or not, but it's interesting to think about to me. Perhaps Solomon is writing the book, the Song of Solomon, at the end of his life, wishing that he had done what he wrote in this book. Much like the book of Ecclesiastes, this interpretation of Song of Solomon is saying that Solomon is writing this book at the end of his life for the purpose of encouraging those and instructing those who come after him not to make the same mistakes that he did. Again, is that right? I don't know, but it's interesting to think about. I don't have an answer. I'm not certain why Solomon was the one who wrote this book. What I do know is that if we look at Song of Solomon chapter 1 and verse 1, it says, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. That's all I can tell you. But we also see that when we look at this book, we find some very helpful reminders about how a godly, happy, healthy marriage should look. Now, before we dive into the text and examine some of the things that are recorded in Song of Songs, I want to issue a quick disclaimer. I'm not married. I have very little dating experience. I don't really have any idea at all what it's like to be married. I can only speak from what I've seen, from stereotypes that I've witnessed. Many of you here tonight have been married much longer than I've been alive. And so if anyone should be talking about reminders for a godly, happy, healthy marriage, it probably shouldn't be me. It's my hope, however, that this lesson can be just that, a reminder. A reminder of things that you probably already know and practice in your marriage. I don't want this lesson coming across as the unmarried single guy telling people who've been married longer than I've been alive how you should be married and what it's like to be married, because I don't know. And so if that's how I come across, please know that's not my intention. I'm just trying, again, to provide you some reminders of what you probably already know and practice in your relationship with your spouse. I also want to point out that this lesson is not meant to step on any toes, and it's not meant to try and interfere with your personal and your private life. With that said, the Song of Solomon reminds us of at least 3 things that are important if we want to have a healthy, happy, and godly marriage. First of all, the Song of Solomon reminds us that married couples are supposed to enjoy one another sexually. Speaking strictly of the stereotypes that I've seen and heard about regarding marriage, because again, I'm not married, far too often it feels like sex is a burden. It feels like it's something to get over with as soon as possible, and not something that is intended to bring a husband and wife closer together, again, both physically and emotionally. And that is if sex is happening at all. Again, speaking strictly about stereotypes, it seems that sex is sometimes used as a negotiation tactic or threat. One spouse is essentially going to proclaim, we're not going to have sex until I get what I want. Now, it's very possible that I'm wrong about these assumptions. It's very possible that what I've heard, that these stereotypes are not true. But if they are true, that sex has become a chore or a hostile negotiation, if that's true, then sex has become something less than what it was created and intended to be. The Bible teaches us that sex is something that God has given to husbands and wives to draw them closer together, not to push them apart. We see this in the Song of Songs, but it's also something Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians. We're going to jump into the text of Song of Solomon here in a moment, but for now, let's look at what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, we're going to read the first 5 verses. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. Paul says here, now concerning the matters about which you wrote, quote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, end quote. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. But then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. In this passage, Paul is clearly saying that in order to avoid sexual sins such as idolatry and fornication, men and women should come together to become husband and wife. Paul says that the husband should fulfill the sexual needs of his wife, and the wife should fulfill the sexual needs of her husband. It's not limited to one gender or the other. It's not about one person's better than the other. It's about both of them meeting the needs of one another. Because when you get married, and when you become one flesh with someone, the goal is not to look after yourself, to chase after your own desires and your own needs. It's to meet the needs of your spouse. And to trust that because they love you, they're going to meet your needs. Paul says the husband does not have authority over his own body anymore. That belongs to his spouse. That belongs to his wife. And the wife doesn't have authority over her body anymore. That belongs to her husband. And then in verse 5, Paul explicitly says that a husband and wife should not deprive each other of sex unless it's agreed upon by both of them for a limited time. And he does go on later in this passage to say that he wished everyone would remain unmarried like he was. But he clearly points out that that is his opinion and not a command from God. Again, sex is a beautiful gift from God for married couples to enjoy together. And speaking again stereotypically, it's a gift that often gets neglected. From what I see and from what I understand, of course, there are going to be moments where one spouse, or perhaps neither spouse, has the time or the energy or the desire to enjoy having intimacy with their partner. Someone might be stressed or sick or exhausted or just don't feel like having sex, and that's okay. I don't think Paul or Solomon is saying that married couples have to be having sex all the time, or that one spouse should force the other to have sex when they don't feel like it. I don't think that's what Paul and Solomon are saying. What I do think they're saying is that sex is a part of a healthy, happy, godly marriage. It's certainly not the only requirement to this. Even if the sex is present in a marriage relationship, that relationship can still be struggling if other aspects are missing. But sex is certainly part of a loving relationship with your spouse. Because when you're having sex, that's one way of showing your spouse that you are still attracted to them, physically and emotionally. It shows how much you care about them and how much they matter to you. And you can do this even with simple gestures of physical affection. Holding hands, sharing a kiss, giving your spouse a hug also demonstrates these things. I think physical affection is perhaps the root of sex, and both are necessary in a healthy marriage. When we read the Song of Solomon, we're reminded of the importance of sexual and physical intimacy in marriage. But the Song of Solomon also reminds us about the importance of speaking well to and about our spouse. As we mentioned a moment ago, there's a lot more to a happy and healthy marriage than just having sex and showing physical affection, because it matters how you speak to your spouse. The lovebirds in the Song of Solomon do an excellent job of speaking to each other in love. Every word they say is meant to be encouraging to their partner. They don't say anything to tear them down or to hurt them. The way that they speak to each other is full of love and kindness and encouragement. They make sure to take the time to shower their lover with compliments and to let their partner know how much they care about them. For instance, look at Song of Solomon chapter 1 with me, specifically verses 15 through 17. Song of Solomon chapter 1, verses 15 through 17. Song of Solomon chapter 1, verses 15 through 17. The gentleman starts, "Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves." The wife responds, "Behold, you are beautiful, my beloved, truly delightful. Our couch is green, the beams of our house are cedar, our rafters are pine." In this exchange, the young man, responding to what his wife had said earlier in the passage, calls his soon-to-be bride beautiful. He says, "You are beautiful, my love. You are beautiful." And so the young woman responds and says to the young man, "You are also beautiful." She calls him my beloved. And she says that he is truly delightful. Now, we see a couple instances here in verses 15 through 17 of some of those cultural references that perhaps we don't really understand all that well, but I think we can get the gist of this conversation. They are complimenting each other. They are using their words to build each other up and not to tear each other down. We see later in Song of Solomon passages like chapter 2 and verse 7 and 8, where the young woman compares her future husband to a gazelle. She says that he's so strong and so athletic that he can jump over mountains. In Song of Solomon chapter 4 and verse 7, the young man says to the woman, "You are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you." What person would not want to hear that kind of thing about them? What husband would not want his wife to compare him to Superman, who can jump over tall buildings in a single bound? What wife would not want her husband to tell her that she is incredibly beautiful and that she is perfect just the way she is? It matters how we speak to our spouse, because we can either choose to speak lovingly to them, or we can choose to hurt them with what we say. How we speak to our spouse matters. And it also matters how we say it. It matters what we say to our spouse and how we say it. And I think that's especially true in moments where a spouse is needing some extra reassurance. Perhaps they're feeling insecure about something, or they need a reminder of how much they mean to you. Perhaps they're feeling down on themselves and they're struggling because they have low self-esteem at the moment. And in those times, it's important to make sure that you reassure your spouse and encourage them. We see again the Song of Solomon, the couple here does that very, very well. Look at Song of Solomon chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. Here the woman will start, and then she'll go for a couple verses, and then the gentleman will respond in verse 8. Song of Solomon 1, verses 5 through 8. Again, this is the woman talking. She says, "I am very dark, but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not gaze at me, because I am dark, because the sun has looked upon me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept. Tell me, you whom my soul loves, where you pasture your flock, where you make it lie down at noon. For why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flocks of your companions?" Verse 8, the gentleman responds, "If you do not know, O most beautiful among women, follow in the tracks of the flock and pasture your young goats beside the shepherd's tents." In this passage, it seems that the young woman is insecure about her skin. She says that she was forced to labor in the vineyards, and so her skin has gotten darker. And she tells her future husband not even to look at her. "Don't gaze at me because I am dark," she says. She's talking about her tan, how she worked in the vineyard. Her self-esteem is low at this point because she's focusing on what she thinks is a flaw in her appearance. She then asks where she can find her young man who is out with the sheep. And again, remember, this is poetry. Look at how he responds. Right after she makes a derogatory comment about herself, an insult about herself, about her appearance, he responds in verse 8 by calling her, "O most beautiful among women." The wife is tearing herself down with her speech, but the husband chooses to build her back up with his words. The same thing happened in chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Read that with me. Again, the woman starts and the husband responds. The woman says, "I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys." Her lover responds, "As a lily among brambles, so is my love among the young women." In this passage, the woman calls herself a rose of Sharon and a lily of the valley. These are terms that, because of how this book was interpreted as an allegory, these are terms that we now associate with Jesus. But when we consider what the young woman was saying, I'm not sure these are the best phrases to use when talking about our Savior. If I'm understanding it correctly, many people have interpreted the phrases rose of Sharon and lily of the valley to mean that the young woman was referring to her beauty as nothing special. She was just one flower in the field of flowers. There wasn't anything about her to draw special interest, especially from a young man. But her young man takes her own words and changes them. He says, "You're not a lily of the valley. Instead, you're a lily amongst brambles. No other woman compares to you. It's only you that I find beautiful, he says to her. Again, we see the power that our words can have on our spouse. We can choose to either reassure them and encourage them and show them love by how we talk to them, or we can tear our spouse down and hurt them with our words. The way we speak to our spouse matters. But it also matters how we speak about our spouse when we're talking to other people. Again, speaking stereotypically, it seems like sometimes the longer a couple's been married, the worse that they talk about each other. I don't know if you've seen this or not, but it feels like in every movie there's a scene where at the same time both the guy and the girl are talking with their friends about how awful their spouse is. I just can't believe that my wife did this. I just can't believe that my husband did this. And all of their friends are saying, yeah, your husband's awful. Yeah, your wife is terrible. People even make comments like that, not just about their spouse, but about marriage in general. When people get married, someone will tell them, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Marriage is a trap. You're wasting your life. They paint marriage as the worst decision that someone can make. But that's not how the Bible views marriage. That's not how God talks about marriage. The biblical view of marriage is that marriage is a blessing, is that it's a benefit. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 22 reminds us that he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. So we need to make sure that we're promoting the biblical view of marriage and gently correcting those who only choose to speak negatively of their spouse to others. And we need to make sure that we refrain from speaking negatively about our spouse to others. Look again at the example from the young couple here in Song of Solomon. Look at Song of Solomon chapter 5, verses 9 through 16. Song of Solomon chapter 5, verses 9 through 16. Starting in verse 9, we have the others, and then the rest of this passage is the young woman. Verse 9, the others say, "What is your beloved more than another beloved, O most beautiful among women? What is your beloved more than another beloved, that you thus adjure us?" The woman says, "My beloved is radiant and ruddy, distinguished among 10,000. His head is the finest gold. His locks are wavy, black as a raven. His eyes are like doves beside streams of water, bathed in milk, sitting beside a full pool. His cheeks are like beds of spices, mounds of sweet-smelling herbs. His lips are lilies, dripping liquid myrrh. His arms are rods of gold, set with jewels. His body, his polished ivory, bedeckled with sapphires. His legs are alabaster columns, set on bases of gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as the cedars. His mouth is the most sweet, and he is altogether desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem." In this passage, again, the others that occasionally pop up and talk during this series of conversation, they ask the young woman, "What's so special about your husband? What's so special about your spouse? It doesn't seem like there's anything special about him." And she goes on and talks about how many wonderful qualities her husband has. She finds every part of him attractive and beautiful. And she ends by saying he is altogether desirable. Again, this isn't something that she's saying to her husband. Although, as we just mentioned, this is probably something he would have liked to hear. It would have helped him if he had heard this. Instead, she's telling other people how amazing her spouse is. And we need to make sure to do the same. We need to make sure to defend our spouse when others try to tear them down or demean them in front of us. And so we should speak words of encouragement both to our spouse and about our spouse. Paul, writing in the book of Ephesians, reminded the Christians there, speaking to all Christians, to speak words of encouragement, to build up and not to corrupt. And again, he's speaking to all Christians there, but I think that certainly applies within the marriage relationship as well. When we study the Song of Songs, we're reminded that a happy, healthy, godly marriage is one where the spouses share in sexual and physical intimacy. We're reminded that it matters how we speak to and how we speak about our spouse. But we're also given the reminder of how important it is to protect the sanctity of marriage. Marriage is not an earthly custom or a man-made tradition. It is a sacred covenant instituted by God, where two people pledge to love, to cherish, and to meet the needs of each other for the rest of their lives. Marriage is the foundation of all society. The world is made up of married couples and their children. And when a group of married couples and their children come together, that's a community, which becomes a town, and then a state, and so on. If marriage is forgotten, or it becomes something other than what God meant it to be, than what God created it to be, then society begins to crumble. And I think we can easily see that in the world around us today. The Hebrew author wrote this. He said, "Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. For God will judge the sexually immoral and the adulterers." That's Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 4. Marriage should be looked at as important and valuable and precious. Both the institution of marriage itself and your spouse. But you cannot hold to that view if you are content to give spouse privileges to someone who is not your spouse. For instance, those who are not married need to protect their virginity. Not just because premarital sex goes against the Word of God, but because it spoils and ruins a gift and a blessing that is reserved for married couples. It is a gift from God that is best enjoyed in the way that God has designed. The young lovers from the book of Song of Solomon understood this. Several times throughout the book, in places like chapter 2 and verse 7, chapter 3 and verse 5, we find the phrase, "Do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases." As much as this young couple desired to be with each other, they understood that they had to wait until the right time. They understood that they needed to be patient so that they could enjoy the blessings from God in His timing. We also cannot hold marriage in honor if we are being unfaithful to our spouse and cheating on them with another person. Again, Hebrews 13, chapter 13 and verse 4 already mentioned that God would judge the adulteress. Marriage is supposed to be between one man and one woman for life. Each person is promising to love the other and only the other as long as they live, till death do us part. Again, the young couple in the Song of Songs understood this. In Song of Songs chapter 2 and verse 16, we read the phrase, "My beloved is mine and I am his." And that phrase is repeated in chapter 6 and verse 3. Each partner was promising that they were going to belong to the other. We read in Proverbs chapters 5 and 7, the entirety of those chapters, how dangerous it is to give in to adultery and to sleep with someone other than your spouse. When we get married, we're promising to be faithful to one person for the rest of our lives. And that's not a promise that should be taken lightly. That means the thoughts of adultery and polygamy and pornography should never even enter our minds, because we have decided, we have set our heart to never lust after someone who's not our spouse. When we study the book of Song of Solomon, we're reminded that married couples should enjoy each other sexually and physically. They should have and share in that intimacy together. We're reminded to speak words of encouragement and love and comfort to our spouse and about our spouse. And Song of Solomon reminds us about the sanctity of marriage. Marriage is an incredible blessing given to us by God, but it's also a responsibility. How we treat God's laws about marriage and how we treat our spouse matters. If there's anyone here tonight who recognizes perhaps they violated God's laws about sex or marriage, or there's anyone here tonight who recognizes perhaps that you've not treated your spouse correctly, tonight does not have to be the end of your story. You can have your sins forgiven if you've been baptized in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. If there's anything at all that we as a church family can do for you, whether you need to be baptized or you would like to ask for prayers in the support of the church, you have an opportunity tonight to let us know by coming forward as we stand and as we sing.